Hi all, this is Simona Rich, and in this video I would like to read out my article on spiritualized ego versus true awakening. Whilst living in India, I had my fair share of experiences with people who come here for spiritual development. Since India is a spiritual place and has many ashrams and other places of devotion, the string of pilgrims is stable. Usually those who come here for spiritual development are the most unnatural kind, and it's rare to meet someone who is truly awakened. There are also those spiritual aspirants who know they are only seekers and are humble about it, but unfortunately many are still strongly in the grip of the ego, who convinces them that they are already very spiritual. I only met several awakened people, but those meetings left indelible memories. Those special individuals did not try to impress others with their looks or speech. They did not want to prove to the world how spiritual they were, because they were already spiritual. Most people, however, perceive spirituality through the eyes of the ego. They aren't awakened yet. They still operate through the mechanism of the ego rather than from the inner void, the place of stillness. I'm writing this because it's crucial to at least get onto that path of spirituality by trying to get rooted in stillness. Otherwise, your journey is just the ego's attempt to spiritualize itself, which it sometimes quite enjoys because it's not diminished but maintained. It's not that the ego is afraid of spirituality. It quite enjoys it in its many forms. It only perceives spirituality as a threat when you understand that being spiritual has nothing to do with appearances, and it has nothing to do with where you go and who you associate with. When your true work starts of dwelling in the present moment and you do not react, neither do you identify with your thoughts, that's when the ego perceives spirituality as threatening. Otherwise, it's just a pleasant way that it uses to maintain or strengthen itself, and it quite enjoys going to spiritual places, doing yogic stretches, engaging in spiritual discussions, praying, associating with spiritual people, wearing spiritual clothes, and so forth. So when you go to places like ashrams in India, you're faced with the sight of egos acting spiritual. If certain egos perceive spirituality to be a serious business, the faces naturally of those people are tense. If people are after bliss, there is an attempt to look blissful. It all depends on what spirituality is interpreted to be. So the ego puts on a mask of either seriousness, tension, or bliss, but it's not coming from within. It's just a mask. Sometimes people dress spiritually to appear more spiritual. White robes are common among the spiritual seekers in India, or wearing traditional Indian clothes that they perceive to appear more spiritual. There is also a type that considers themselves, the type of people that consider themselves very deep. And they usually have serious looks, try to give penetrating glances, and identify with some elaborate dogma. And then there are blissful devotees of gurus who absolutely worship a self-proclaimed God-man, and they believe that this makes them very spiritual. Other people, after finding spirituality or starting to be interested in spirituality, start talking very slowly as though each word is meaningful. Others slow down their movements. Others change their tone of voice, which they think makes them more spiritual, but it simply sounds unnatural and off-putting. I often hear this fake voice in people who give spiritual teachings, as though such voice quality is what matters and not the teaching. So again, we notice here that the changes are being done on the surface. It's not coming from within. And when you are spiritually awake, you feel whether it's an empty pot or a pot filled. You just feel if a person is just trying to appear spiritual, or whether that spirituality comes from within. So those people who are still trying to appear spiritual, but within they did not discover anything, they're like empty pots. I don't know how to maybe it's the wrong comparison, but it's like nothing is there yet, but they are trying to make changes from the outside, and it may fool some people, but those who are spiritually awakened, they will not be fooled. Other people do not part with their yoga mats, others meditate in train stations and other public places, and others socialize only with those who belong to the same spiritual belief structure that they themselves subscribe to. In fact, it's common for people strongly in the grip of the ego to search out those who believe as they do. Because the ego always feels insecure, its sense of self is strengthened the more other egos join that other ego. So the road to the real spirituality is not done in a herd, in a crowd. It's just when you're awake and you're on your own and you develop in your own way. And if you join some kind of institution or a movement, it's just full of spiritualized egos. But those who are really awakening, it's a road that you have to take alone. Others talk for hours about yogic or other philosophies, but with that talk, they only try to compensate for the lack of depth. I know many teachers who talk non-stop about awakening, yogic practices, but within this, they are empty. Those who talk most know the least. Those who talk the least know the most, usually. Of course, there are also those who don't talk because they really don't know. My dog wants to come in, so I apologize. Okay. The reason of writing all this is to make people wake up. This is not spirituality, this is egoic role-playing. The ego is very crafty in making people believe that they are very spiritual. Thus, I listed as many ego role-playing observations as I could think of. It's not meant to insult anyone. Of course, it would do if someone was identified with some particular label that I mentioned, but it's not meant to insult anyone. It's just meant to awaken those who might be falling for one or more of such ego tricks. And the next thing I want to talk about is judging the level of spirituality through the lens of some spiritual dogma. Another mistake spiritual seekers make is identifying with some ideology and then filtering everything through it, which I definitely could be blamed for in the past and not once, and that's why I'm very aware that this is happening in the world, because I myself fell into this trap a few times. For example, I have read some negative comments about Eckhart Tolle. People who are identified with some Indian ideologies were attacking him for eating meat. The argument was that if he's awakened, he must be compassionate and thus he should not eat meat. So basically, they are telling he's not awakened because he eats meat. Buddha allowed his disciples to eat meat. You know that if you read original Buddhist texts, which means he probably ate meat too, because he lived his teachings, what he taught others. He did not just preach without putting everything that he taught himself in practice. Jesus ate meat too, judging from the fact that he celebrated the Passover, and that wasn't a vegetarian holiday celebration. The universe works this way, through sacrifice. We also will have to die sooner or later to become the food of other organisms. We eat plants who are living beings. I actually wrote here, we eat planets who are living beings. We eat plants who are living beings. The problem today is that people have unnatural appetites, and therefore they crave meat all the time, creating enormous suffering for animals, as the whole industry had to be developed to serve that terrible unnatural taste. Hunter-gatherers did not create imbalance in nature because they acted like other beings. Tigers aren't blamed for killing creatures. I personally think people need very little meat or no meat at all. Eggs and milk can be sufficient in order to have all their mineral and vitamin intake needs met. Those who really need meat, and there are really people who don't function well without it, should take personal responsibility and actually hunt the free animal down. That's in Now it can be done in most places, but I'm just telling that would be the right thing to do. Destiny will give the right animal whose time is over if people would do that, and this would be the natural way, and people would then feel personal responsibility rather than buying meat in stores when it's already killed, and may be much more compassionate and would only hunt where they really in need of this food. They would understand what it takes to take a life, and they might be praying to hunt down an animal for the universe to provide an animal whose time is over anyway. So that would be more, they would know what it takes to kill an animal. They would understand that this world works on sacrifice. They would become much more compassionate were the world to work in such a way today. Now, of course, the system is not like what it was in the past. Now animals are kept in cages in terrible conditions to have no life of freedom, but to serve as a source of food. So where they actually just in forests enjoying freedom, and then someone prays for, because that person needs meat intake, and then that person prays for the universe to provide the animal whose time is over. That would be much better than the way that it works now, where animals are kept just as food source for humans and they have no enjoyment at all. If someone today would want to hunt animals for them to serve as a source of food, that would actually be illegal in at least some parts of the world. So the system is what it is, and therefore sometimes you have to comply with it if what you want cannot be gotten in any other way. So that's the system that we live in now, and if we can't just go out and hunt animals. It's a horrible system, but sometimes there is no way that we can go around it. So labeling people unspiritual just because they eat meat is ignorant. Plants live too, yet vegetarians eat them. We would die where we choose not to hurt any being, because everything is conscious in this universe. This world runs on sacrifice. When a person identifies with vegan or other ideology, he just placed a lens between himself and the world, and usually such people strengthen their egos considerably by thinking that they are actually more special, more spiritual than others. So those vegan or vegetarian commenters wrote in such a cruel way about Eckhart. I wonder how come they love animals but are so cruel to their fellow humans. And I'm not telling all vegans are like that, but many, I think many of them are, because they're just too strongly identified with this label. It's unwise to judge whether a person is spiritual or not through your own beliefs or through the lens of some spiritual text that you like. This only strengthens the ego and creates the feeling of separation from other humans. It's unwise to think that people are only spiritual if they meet some spiritual checklist, according to whom that checklist is error-free. So in conclusion, in this article I wanted to address these two spiritual traps caused by the ego, which either maintain the ego or even strengthen it. Perceiving spirituality through the mechanism of the ego and trying to appear spiritual without any change actually happening within. And the second trap is by judging about the spiritual level of others based on what you read or believe spiritual people to behave or look like. What you read about how spiritual people should behave. To avoid the first mistake, the external change should not be initiated by, I will read this again, excuse me. To avoid the first mistake, the external change should not be initiated by your thought. Instead, if you are present and conscious as much as possible in your life, this increasing consciousness will uncover such depths within your being and so much power that no matter how you look, how quick or slow you speak, and how you dress, people will sense your power and presence. And the second mistake can be avoided if, when you meet someone for the first time, you stop any sort of judgment or comparison, but instead you get totally still and sense the energy that the person has, despite of how he looks, behaves, or sounds like. This will give a true insight into what the person truly is and how conscious he or she is. That's all I wanted to share with you in this video. Thank you for watching. Take care.